My biological parents are still alive, but I can't call them mom and dad. I was handed over to foster parents. They named me Emily. They were very kind to me. They bought me new clothes. After I finished my college entrance exams, they took my admission notice, but they sent my younger sister to college. At that time, I realized the name I had used for 13 years did not belong to me. In fact, my real name is Grace. The year I was born, there was a heavy snowfall in the village. Outside the house, my father held his pipe and whispered, "Bless my son. The Smith family line depends on him." My mother was in pain and sweating. Her hands were soaked with sweat. The midwife told her to push harder. The baby was about to be born. When I was born, I cried so loudly that it could be heard through the stone wall. It was snowing heavily. But my father was standing in front of the house. The new snow under his feet had already melted into water. He saw that I was a girl, and he said I was useless, because my mother had given birth to a girl. No one would take care of me during the month after childbirth. My two older sisters helped for a week. Then they started preparing for Christmas. Everyone said that snow in winter meant a good harvest in the coming year. But my parents always said I looked like the reincarnation of the winter-hungry ghost. Because of my birth, my mother was unable to conceive again for 3 years. My father had always hoped for a son. He took all his disappointment and anger out on me. I followed him out into the fields to weed. I was also responsible for feeding the pigs. If I was lucky, I could eat the fish bones my father left over. My two sisters had their own rooms. I had to sleep in the small bed in the wood-fired house. Until dawn, my bed was next to the room where my parents slept. At night, my mother's wheezing and groaning made it hard to sleep. I curled up and prayed silently. I hoped that this time my mother would give birth to a brother. My eldest sister's name was Sophia. My second sister's name was Lily. I was Emily. The next day, I saw my mother lying on the bed. A high pillow was placed under her lower back. I walked softly to the bedside. I whispered, "Mother, I'm hungry." My mother stared at me. Her eyes were stern. Suddenly, she raised her hand and slapped me on the head. I was so dizzy that I ran straight into the door. She said to me angrily, "You good-for-nothing. I should let you starve to death. I should let you starve to death right away." Her tone was full of resentment. It was as if I were her enemy. My mother hadn't been able to conceive for years. My father often beat her because of it. The midwife in the village said she didn't take proper care of herself during the postpartum period after the birth of her third child. That's why she's sick. My father's gaze fixed on me. It was as if he wanted to devour me whole. When I was 4 years old, a witch doctor came to the village. He said he could help my mother conceive. The old man was dark and skinny. His eyes were like copper bells. He stared at me menacingly from behind his chair. His eyes were cunning, like an animal hiding in the shadows. It made people feel very uncomfortable. He smiled and said to my parents, "The third child blocks your son's fortune. As long as the third child's bad luck is removed, you will have a son." My mother covered her stomach with her hand. Her eyes were fixed on me. I screamed in fear. I turned around and ran. As I ran, I muttered under my breath, "Don't hit me." Then I fled from home in a panic. I hid in the small forest next to the house. The sun was about to set, but I didn't dare go back. I curled up in the grass. I wrapped my clothes around me tightly. "Emily, where are you?" I heard my second sister calling me. My stomach was growling. I couldn't hold back. I answered, "Lily, I'm here." I slowly moved my body. I carefully climbed out of the grass. I hadn't quite stood up when my second sister suddenly grabbed my arm. She shouted excitedly and waved to the side. "Father, I've found my third sister. You'll have to pay for my tuition." I stared straight ahead, pale. My heart filled with fear. My tongue felt like it had turned to stone. I couldn't say a word. I struggled desperately, trying to break free from my second sister's grip. My second sister held on tightly. I bit her hard and turned to run, but my father caught me. He was holding a wooden stick. He looked at me with a gloomy expression. His face was fierce. "If I can beat this unlucky thing away, I can have a son." It was night. The cicadas were chirping. It was a hot summer night. My parents locked me in the woodshed. They hit me with a barbed stick. I cried and screamed. I blamed them in my heart for giving birth to me. I was covered in wounds. I watched my second sister prepare to go to school with her school bag on her back. My father patted her head. He gave her 20 yuan for school fees. We are all father's daughters. Why do we get different amounts of love? I am the youngest child in the family. Even the dogs that pass by dislike me. It's as if I am a piece of bone that no one wants. Every day, My parents force me to drink the herbal ash water they bought from the witch doctor for 50 yuan. They say that drinking this will get rid of the bad luck in me and make it disappear little by little. My new wounds are piled on top of my old ones. There is hardly any place on my body that is intact, but I also want to go to school. I also want to be like other children, carrying a sackcloth bag, running 10 kilometers to school. My second sister recites ancient poems. I can also recite arithmetic up to 10. I have secretly learned it too. Why can't I go to school? It's just after Christmas. The village girls have all returned to their natal homes. I squat with a group of children playing at the street corner. One of the boys there said proudly that he went to school. He had also learned the Tang poem. He was reciting the spring dawn he had just learned. Spring sleep does not know dawn. Every day I hear the birds sing. I listened and shook my head. I corrected him. It should be spring sleep does not know dawn. Every day I smell the birds sing. The little boy was very angry. He shouted, "You've never been to school. How could you know this?" I refused to admit defeat. I silently recited the entire poem. The adults nearby looked at me a few more times. They said to my father, who had just walked out of the alley, "Your third son is quite smart." My father glared at me. I immediately dared not speak. I squatted on the ground and pretended to be a mute. That day, I was afraid that I would be beaten if I went home. I waited until it was dark before I dared to go back. But when I got home, I found that there were two unfamiliar people at home. My mother called me with a smile, "Emily, come here." I stood still. I felt uneasy about my parents' sudden gentleness. She saw that I was still in a daze. Smiling, she took my hand and pushed me in front of the two strangers. "Emily, our family is poor. We can't afford to send you to school. This woman will take care of you and let you go to school." My mother pointed at a middle-aged woman. She said happily. Her skin was a healthy reddish yellow. She was a little fatter than my mother. She smiled and shouted at me, "Emily, come with us. We'll let you go to school." I was stunned. I looked at my father standing in the main room. He was counting a stack of bills in his hands. He said happily, "Our family is rich now." All the hope in my eyes vanished completely. I slowly walked towards the middle-aged couple. I looked up at them. After a long hesitation, I finally whispered, "Mum, Dad." That day, the two families laughed happily. My parents took me back to town. They said I should study hard, so I could support them in their old age. My father couldn't stop smiling as he held the 300 yuan. We arrived in town. They bought me a new outfit. I stood there, dumbfounded in my pink floral padded jacket. I couldn't help but glance at the mirror. It was really pretty. I had never worn such a pretty dress before. They took me to cut my hair short. I looked at the hair scattered on the floor. Then I looked at myself in the mirror. I felt a little strange. They also took me to change my name. Now I'm called Grace. Grace is a beautiful name. It's as sweet as honey at mealtimes. My mother hands me an egg. I sit obediently in my chair, a little nervous. After receiving the egg, I just eat in silence. I'm afraid I'll say the wrong thing. They would send me back. I still want to eat the egg, and I want to keep wearing this pretty flowered cotton jacket. My mother looked at me eating happily. She patted my head with satisfaction and said, "This child is easy to raise. When we get old, someone will take care of us." My father looked at my mother and nodded. Then he said slowly, "After the new year, send her to school and see how she does in her studies." When I heard this, my heart suddenly became nervous. At that time, compulsory education had already become universal, but the village was very poor. Not many children could go to school. I didn't go to school. I learned everything secretly from my second sister. When I entered school, I was worried that I couldn't keep up with the teacher. I remembered when my second sister came home. The teacher had beaten her hands with a ruler until they were red and swollen. My heart felt uneasy. It was as if a claw was constantly scratching. My mother sewed a school bag for me from an old cloth and bought 2 pencils and an eraser. I looked at these things by the bed. I felt like I had won a treasure. Fortunately, after I entered school, I was able to keep up with the teacher's teaching pace. In class, I was the quickest learner. During the final grade exam, I answered the questions correctly and got 98 points. I sat at the dinner table and spread the exam paper out flat. I looked at my parents expectantly. My mother picked up the exam paper. Her eyes widened. She immediately stood up, picked up an egg, and walked over to the stove to give Grace a snack. What a smart kid. Dad usually doesn't smile much, but he gave me a little pat on the head. Encouragingly, "Well done. Keep up the good work." That year, I was rewarded with 3 yuan in New Year's money for my hard work. A year later, my birth mother got pregnant. I returned to the village with my parents. I saw my birth mother standing in the street with a big belly. Her belly was sticking out. She told everyone she loved sour food. I held onto my mother's hand tightly. I didn't dare to look at my birth mother. When my birth mother saw my mother, her tone of voice carried a hint of ridicule. As soon as the third child left, the fourth one came. "Eldest sister, you have to take good care of your family's lucky star." My mother glared at her fiercely, her eyes fixed on her biological mother's belly, but she couldn't say anything. I was dragged away by my mother. Behind us, I heard my biological parents talking to the neighbors. Their voices pierced my ears. "This child is a curse. We should have gotten rid of her a long time ago. HMPH. We only have 3 children. These 3 children are my heart's treasure." Every word from my biological mother stung like a needle. It hurt so much that tears welled up in my eyes. My mother put her hand on my shoulder. She whispered words of comfort. "Grace, you're so smart. Let's study hard together. We'll get into a good university." I looked up immediately. My eyes shone with anticipation. Okay. But one time I came home from school a little earlier than usual. I saw my mother in the shop telling my father, "The Smith family really did have a son. Will this girl bring us bad luck?" I stood behind the door. My hands, carrying my school bag, gripped the straps tightly. My throat tightened. I held a test paper with a perfect score in my hands. Tears could not be held back. In fact, my parents had been married for almost 10 years. They probably wanted a child of their own, too. I heard my father say, "This girl is good at her studies. She will have a bright future. We will also be able to enjoy the fruits of our labor." You are right. I was wrong just now. Forget it. Let's not talk about it. I froze for a moment. My nose got a little bit stuffy. My eyes got a little bit red. After a while, I pretended to have just arrived home. I ran quickly towards them. "Mom and Dad, I got full marks." They both hugged me. They said I was smart. Dad bought me an ice lolly as a reward. I treasured that ice lolly. I carefully broke it into 3 parts and shared it with my parents. I told them. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to finish it all and it would go to waste. I hoped they would praise me for being sensible. From then on, I studied even harder. While other children my age were playing in the sand and having fun, I wanted to learn more. After school, I would even sit in my seat and review what I had learned that day. It was really not easy to be able to go to school. I had to study hard. I wanted to repay my parents in the future, but it was the year I moved up to the 2nd grade. My mother became pregnant. My parents went to the hospital for several checkups. My mother gently touched her belly, as tenderly as she would with her own child. They laughed and talked. My father bought 10 large shrimps at dinner. My mother gave me half. I had a happy dream. In my dream, my sister was very pretty. Our family of 4 was very happy. My mother's belly grew bigger and bigger every day. The neighbors often told me, "When your mother gives birth to a brother, you will be sold." To get a daughter-in-law for the family, I quickly covered my ears, shook my head vigorously, and kept saying to myself, "I'm a good boy for my mother. She won't sell me." I behaved even more obediently at home, helped my mother look after the shop, and cleaned and did the laundry when I got home. When my mother was happy, she would praise me for being sensible, but the fear in my heart did not diminish at all. In the middle of the night, I hid under the covers and cried. I covered myself tightly with the quilt, afraid that if I made a sound, my parents would be unhappy. When we went to the hospital, I followed my father. My mother was pale. She leaned against the hospital bed. In her arms was a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. She was smiling with eyes full of tenderness and intimacy that I had never seen before. I was holding a bowl of freshly made chicken soup in my hands. I walked carefully over to my mother. I said to her, "Mom, the chicken soup is ready. Drink it while it's still hot." My mother nodded with a smile. I looked at the baby lying next to my mother. I hesitated for a long time. Then I asked, embarrassed, "Mom, can I have a look at my sister?" My mother's eyes flickered with hesitation, but it quickly disappeared. She slowly nodded. She said, "Go ahead." The smile on the corner of her mouth faded slightly. After saying that, she added, "Don't touch your sister." I quickly withdrew my hand. I didn't know what to do, so I put my hands behind my back. I nodded vigorously. My father worked at the factory. He couldn't take leave from work, and he didn't know how to do the laundry, so I was in charge of taking care of my mother during her confinement. I sat in the courtyard. I took the soapberry and scrubbed my sister's diapers vigorously. I made sure that every piece was clean, but my mother never praised me for being clever and capable. As she used to, her eyes were always on my sister. There was a photo of her on the table, taken when she was 100 days old. She was wearing a little red belly band. She was smiling like a sunflower. My parents adopted me. They gave me a home. I really appreciate them. I don't want anything more. My sister's nappies were made from pure cotton. Everyone in the village said that used diapers are better for babies. My mother bought me lots of new clothes. After I had worn them for a few days, I cut them up to make diapers for my sister. This dress was more comfortable, softer, and prettier than anything I had ever worn before. I secretly kept one for the next few years. It was the only new dress I ever had. My sister lived like a princess. She had so many clothes that I couldn't even count them, and lots of pretty hair ties that I never got to use. I lay in my cot. I hear my sister crying in the next room. My parents are whispering to her. I'm happy that my sister has come. I use the money I've saved for a year and buy my sister a lollipop. I don't know what a strawberry flavor tastes like, but I'm so excited to give it to her. My mother frowns. She takes the lollipop back from me and says, "Sweets are bad. Children shouldn't eat sweets." I carefully withdrew my hand. I felt in my heart that I might have done something wrong. I didn't really understand what it meant to be loved. I just did what I thought was right. I tried to show my sister that I liked her. I thought life would get better and better, but unknowingly I had veered off course. My sister had a wardrobe full of clothes like a doll's. There wasn't even room for a single closet. Pure milk. Mom orders it every year. My sister has a bowl of milk. I only have a cup. I look at my sister's bowl of milk. My mother pushes the bowl towards my sister and says to me, "Your sister is growing. She needs to drink more milk." I nod silently and drink the milk in my cup contentedly. Recently, my legs have been hurting. I can only run halfway during running drills. The PE teacher says I lack calcium. I need to eat more eggs and milk. I hold onto the clothes that don't fit. I didn't dare tell my mother. The family shop was doing better and better. A TV was also bought. Eggs and meat were always in the kitchen. Every day, my mother made my sister egg porridge. It was smooth and tender. The last time I had it was in the 2nd grade of primary school. I could only eat 1 egg a week. I only saw lard from the family meat. My mother always said it was for my sister. I didn't dare to argue. "Grace, you can't fight with your sister." My mother suddenly held down my chopsticks as I reached for the meat dish. I froze. My sister also stopped eating. My mother's expression suddenly changed. She picked up the meat and put it in my sister's bowl. She said, "Erbao, eat more." They let me go to school. I'm already very satisfied, but I was still a little sad. I did all the laundry at home. When my parents weren't home, I also had to take care of my sister. I was also in charge of helping my sister with her homework. Also falls to me. When my sister turned 10, I moved into the storeroom that my parents had tidied up. The room had a neat little bed and a small desk. It faced south, but because it was a storeroom, there was no window. Not a single ray of light came in. My sister moved into my room. Mum bought her a new bed. The mattress was thick. It looked very comfortable. Mum even specially put pink wallpaper in my sister's room. I've only been in there a few times. My sister is 5 years younger than me, but she's about the same size as me. I wear her old clothes, but they're newer than anything I've ever worn before. Mum has gone back to her parents to plant corn. I'm staying at home to look after my sister. While cooking, my sister yells that she wants eggs, and she gives me one when we eat. Before I finish lunch, Mum and Dad come home. Mum sees the egg in my bowl, grasped my arm, and asked angrily, "Grace, why did you eat your sister's egg?" My arm went numb. My hands kept shaking. My lips trembled slightly. My head buzzed. I was completely speechless. My sister, who was sitting quietly at the table, suddenly shouted, "My sister stole it. Mom, my sister stole my egg." Mom's face turned pale. She looked sternly at me. "Grace, how could you be so inconsiderate?" He said, while dragging me towards the door. The sun was high in the sky outside. It made my skin burn. I saw my sister making faces in the courtyard, as if she were saying, "Bad woman." That day, I stood from morning until night. It wasn't until breakfast the next morning that my mother poked her head out of the house. She simply said, "Dinner's ready." There was stewed chicken on the table. I ate plain noodles. There was only a spoonful of sauce in the bowl. My younger sister gobbled up the chicken in front of me. She made a point of making a noise, as if to show off her good fortune. I quietly clenched my lips and ran back to the utility room. I wrapped myself in a damp quilt, covered my mouth, and cried in secret. Outside, the family was happily together. My younger sister was watching The Black Cat Detective. Her laughter kept echoing in my ears. So it turns out, growing up can happen in an instant. 18 is defined as adulthood. But that doesn't mean you've really grown up. My younger sister lives like a princess at home. She never has to do any housework. My younger sister is sent to all kinds of interest classes by my mother. She says it's to cultivate her interests, to improve her character. I stay in my room, concentrating on preparing for the college entrance exam. Before the college entrance exam, my mother even took me to the police station. She said it was necessary for the entrance exam. I had to go through the formalities in advance. I didn't really understand. I just followed along like a puppet. Maybe it was because I was always the top student in class. My parents didn't really care about my entrance exam results. But when they found out that I had been accepted into the top high school in the city, the whole family was overjoyed. My mother happily bought me a new outfit. I deliberately chose a size larger. Now I don't get to buy new clothes very often. I want to be able to wear them for a few more years. My younger sister saw my mother take me shopping for clothes. She got emotional and started to cry. My mother whispered something in her ear. My sister suddenly giggled. Then she said to me, "Sister, you should choose a nice outfit." I didn't understand what was going on, so I just smiled. When I started high school, my mother felt that the school was too far away, so I had to live in the dorm. She only gave me 200 yuan a month for living expenses. If I wanted to buy exam papers, I had to skip meals. In order to buy exam papers, I scrimped and saved. I didn't want to waste a single exam paper. When I went home at the weekend, I needed to get the money for the college entrance exam medical examination. Just as I arrived at the door, I heard my younger sister say, "Mom, I want to eat spare ribs. Can you braise some spare ribs this afternoon, Grace? Your sister won't be back until this afternoon, so you can eat the meat yourself. We'll stew it again tomorrow." My hand holding the doorknob stopped. Every word my mother said hammered into my brain. My sister's name was also Grace. I remembered my mother's words. My throat felt a bit sour. I felt so uncomfortable that I couldn't speak. That day, I borrowed the light from behind the mill in town to do my homework. I didn't go home until it got dark. When I got home, my mother warmly greeted me and invited me to eat. She had made eggplant and potato stew. The dish had a meaty flavor, but there was no minced meat to be seen. I had no appetite. I took a few bites and went to the utility room. I switched on the old desk lamp and started studying. My younger sister said coldly as she passed my room, "What's the point of studying all this?" I pretended not to hear. I bowed my head and concentrated even more on my homework, but tears quietly slipped down my cheeks. 2 months later, I received my admission notice. I scored 600 points in the college entrance exam. I was successfully admitted to a 211 university in the province. I held the admission notice. I walked home with joy in my heart. My mouth couldn't help but turn up. I thought to myself, I must make a success of myself in the future. I will repay my parents for raising me. At least I won't let them down. But when I got home, I excitedly told them the good news, but they didn't smile at all. That night, they knocked on my door. "Grace, Mom and Dad have something to tell you." My parents' eyes were darting around. I stared at them. All kinds of thoughts raced through my mind. Did they run out of money? Do I have to take out a loan to go to school? Or did they think I didn't do well in the exam? But I never imagined that my mother would smile a little embarrassedly and say, "Grace, when you were registered at the registry office, the information was filled in incorrectly. It was your younger sister's information. Your father reminded me today. I remembered that your original name was Kindness. I got used to calling you that over the years. I forgot to change it. You have always been good at studying, but your sister is not very smart. Why don't you let your sister go to school for you first? Let's repeat the year. Maybe you can do better," she said, tenderly took my hand. Tears rolled down my cheeks. My body suddenly trembled violently. I violently shook off her hand. Why should I? I staggered to my feet. I ran out of the house like crazy. I huddled in front of a petrol station. I burst into tears. All the pent-up frustration of the past years came flooding out. No wonder there were 2 people answering when my family called Grace. My younger sister didn't care about studying. She always said she could go to university too. At first, I tried to persuade her. I said girls should study more, so that she can see a wider world in the future. But after I had persuaded her so many times, I didn't want to mention it again. My parents treated my sister and me differently. I had always seen it. My sister lived like a princess, but I was like a maid at her side. It made me look shabby. I couldn't eat meat, and I didn't get any New Year's money. My sister had mountains of clothes, but my jackets were old and faded. My mother once said she would treat me like her own daughter. Did they really go back on their word? Blood ties are like an invisible bond. No one can escape them. Blood ties hold them close to their hearts. They can't bear to see the pearls of their mouths suffer even a little, but they ignore the grass that grows silently and diligently. Now let me tell you, my name is Grace. Grace, Grace, what a nice name. It's not Emily. It's not Grace. I hugged my knees. The warm wind blew through my disheveled black hair. But it was like the frost of January. It stung my heart. My ID card was with my parents. I couldn't leave. I slept alone in front of the gas station. When I woke up, the sun was burning my face. I suppressed my dissatisfaction. I went home. I pretended to be obedient. I gave my admission notice to my younger sister. My parents helped me contact the repeater class at one middle school. I'm going to repeat the year there. The class starts half a month early, when my sister goes to college. My parents will go with her. I packed 6 duffel bags. They're full of clothes, shoes, and bags I don't recognize. I'm carrying everything alone. I'm going to the class to repeat the year. Last year, when I took the college entrance exam, I had diarrhea because I ate watermelon that had been sitting out overnight. I didn't do very well. This time, when I repeat the year, I will definitely not make any mistakes this time. The high school homeroom teacher looked very surprised when she saw me carrying my school bag to the cram school. She immediately came over. Anxiously, she asked me, "Grace, why are you back?" I smiled helplessly, but tears flowed down my face. "Teacher, my name is Kindness." "Grace." I told the homeroom teacher everything. The teacher was so angry that she immediately wanted to go find my parents, but I held back the teacher. I have already repaid the kindness they showed me, and I will continue to repay it. I will never let them bully me like this again. During my repeat year, I was the most hardworking student in the class. I got up at 5:30 every morning and didn't go to bed until 11:30 at night. Our homeroom teacher told us to write down our goals before the college entrance exam. I stared at the blank piece of paper. I thought about it for a long time. Finally, I wrote, "I want to be free." My desk mate looked at my goal and froze for a moment. He said, "Grace, what kind of goal is that?" I shook my head with a bitter smile. I couldn't tell the bitterness in my heart. If I have to choose kindness, then why can't I also have freedom? I want to be as free as a bird. During the year of retaking the exam, my parents gave me even less living expenses. Only 100 yuan a month. They said my younger sister had big expenses going to college. No matter how poor the family was, they couldn't let her suffer. My younger sister majored in art. When she returned home for the winter holidays, she dressed like a TV star. Beautiful dresses and exquisite makeup. My parents spent money on it. I didn't say anything. The following year, she took the college entrance exam. She did particularly well. Her score was enough to get her into Renmin University. This time, she applied to the school. I learned my lesson. I told my parents I didn't do well. I only got into a normal teacher training school. My parents didn't ask any questions, but every time relatives came over, they said, "My eldest sister is no good. She only got into a regular university." My second child went to a famous university. My relatives sneered, "Old bye." As I said before, a foreigner is not as good as a native. My mother laughed and denied it, but the corners of her mouth rose even higher. When I went to university, my parents told me, "The family finances were tight. You'll have to consider taking out a loan to go to university." I immediately agreed. I had to take out a loan. Otherwise, they would know that I had been accepted at Renmin University. I took advantage of the preferential policies for college students. I quietly transferred my household registration away. I only went home once a year, during the winter vacation, in the house that used to be full of my happy memories. Now it was filled with the laughter of the 3 of them. I was there, feeling like an outsider who didn't fit in, because I didn't have a cell phone. I couldn't call home. My parents felt that I didn't care about them. They didn't even give me any living expenses. The living expenses for these 4 years, I saved it little by working as a waitress, a cashier, and a tutor. My younger sister was spoiled by her parents. She gradually became a bit willful. She excelled at art compared to her classmates. But when she was with classmates from big cities, she seemed to be unable to find her place. When smartphones first became popular, my younger sister begged her parents to buy her one. Her phone rang nonstop all day. There were always different boys on the other end of the line. She looked at me with a hint of triumph in her eyes. It's as if she's provoking me. She's the one who's loved. I'm about to graduate. I'm studying law. I plan to continue with a master's degree. That way I'll have a better advantage when looking for a job in the future. I told my parents about this decision. At the dinner table, my mother suddenly put down her chopsticks. Her Her face was very ugly. She put her hands on her chest. She said in a sharp tone, "You're a girl. After going to college, come back and find a suitable person to marry. What's the point of studying so much? Finding a good man is the most important thing. That's right. Find someone rich to marry. Then life will be easy." My younger sister chimed in. I put down my bowl. I gave my mother a cold stare. I shot back. "I want to go to graduate school. This is for my own sake. A girl's life goal is not just to get married. How dare you talk back?" My mother was so angry that she put down her chopsticks. She stood up and was about to hit me. I grabbed her swinging arm. Her eyes widened. She said coldly, "If you dare hit me, we're through." I finally saw through this family. My sister had just graduated. Mom encouraged her to pursue her dream of becoming an artist, but she urged me to get married early. I guess she wanted me to find someone well off, so as to pave the way for my sister's future. That night, I overheard my parents' conversation when I went to the bathroom. If not for that, I might still not know their good intentions. Over the years, I have made many concessions for my sister. She has taken advantage of me. I even wrote her graduation thesis for her. I have worried about all kinds of family matters. I have been busy running around. Like a free nanny, I have been ordered around. And in the end, I was still being picky. This kindness I feel I have already paid back. Mom listened to me. She slammed the door in my face, pointing outside. She shouted, "Go, we're through, you ungrateful brat." I grabbed my suitcase. Without looking back, I left home. There was no place for me here anymore. In a fit of anger, I deleted their contact information. I moved into the dormitory at school. I concentrated on preparing for the entrance exam. I worked part-time while preparing for the entrance exam. I was so exhausted that on the way back to school, I fainted right there on the roadside. When I woke up, I found myself in a hospital bed. Next to me sat a boy who looked like he was about to fall asleep. When he saw that I had woken up, he immediately perked up and sat up straight. He said, "You're awake." He looked at me in surprise. He quickly exclaimed, "I was surprised to see that you had been admitted to the hospital due to low blood sugar." When I was discharged, the boy helped me pack my bags. Since I had no family to help me, I looked at the large bags and suitcases in his hands and said, "Jack, thank you." Jack's ears suddenly turned red. He nervously scratched his hair. He kept answering, "It's okay, it's okay." My roommate behind me saw this situation and immediately pushed me. I didn't stand firm at once. He hurriedly embraced me. After hard work, I not only got into graduate school, I also found love. I have achieved good results in both my studies and career. After graduation, I successfully joined a well-known law firm. Since breaking off relations with my parents, my father has only called me once, asking if I would be home for the new year. I froze for a moment, something like a blockage in my throat. Finally, I answered, "Not to return over the years. I have always spent the new year alone. Although lonely, I have slowly adapted. I was afraid of being abandoned, but I got used to living alone." On New Year's Eve, while other people were watching the Spring Festival gala in a lively and bustling atmosphere, I was alone, curled up on the sofa in my rented room. I watched TV. The dumplings on the table had long since cooled. I didn't have an appetite to eat them. Only then did I understand. I never really had a home. My efforts were not in vain. I finally succeeded in getting a permanent position at the law firm. The law firm was very satisfied with me and gave me a few cases. I won them all. Unexpectedly, my foster parents suddenly came to see me. They brought Grace with them. They carried big bags and small bags and moved straight into my house. They didn't feel embarrassed at all. As soon as my foster mother sat down, she said to me, "You have a wide range of contacts now. You are well known. Your sister is highly artistic, but her connections are not as good as those people's. Our family is poor. You should help your sister more. Let her meet more people." I glared at her irritably. I didn't want to say anything more. I just grabbed their luggage and threw it out. "Get out. You're not welcome here." I looked at Grace next to me with her heavy makeup. I couldn't help but smile. She looked so different now. There was no longer the quiet, beautiful aura she had when she studied art. Grace had entered society after graduation. She found that she was a long way from those who had graduated from art schools. Back at school, she had been the center of attention. But once she entered the art world, she became unremarkable. I heard that Grace wanted to get close to famous painters in the art world. She asked them for introductions. She found a boyfriend in his 50s. He was almost as old as her adoptive father. She entered her boyfriend's gallery. She even helped serve drinks and solicit sponsors. I thought about the scene I saw when I met up with friends the other day. I couldn't help but cover my mouth and laugh. How is the precious person in your hearts doing now? Do you really understand? Grace noticed that I was looking at her. She immediately glared at me angrily. Not only was I not angry, I laughed instead. I raised my eyebrows slightly and told her in sign language, "Keep acting. I have fought for every step I have taken so far. Now I want to find a big tree to lean on." That's a pretty good idea. I underestimated the extent to which this family would go to save face. The next day, when I went to work, they actually ran outside the law firm and made a big scene. They even put up a banner. It said, "Mom was wrong. Forgive Mom." Hearing the noise outside, I strode out. I took my adoptive mother by the hand and said, "For Grace's sake, you don't even care about face anymore." I looked at my adoptive father, who was silent on the side, and smiled. "You usually care about face the most. Why are you stopping me now?" As I recall, my adoptive father had lived most of his life for face saving. He adopted me because I did well in school. It was face saving to bring me out in public. Every time he went to the office, his clothes were ironed perfectly flat, not a wrinkle in sight. He always put on a show of being a caring father in public. He bought Grace and me the same things, but as soon as we got home, he gave everything to Grace on the pretext that she was growing fast. When my adoptive mother saw me, clung to my legs, crying tears all over my face. Her voice trembled as she said, "My girl, you and Mum are fighting. Mum feels worse than anyone. Everyone in the family misses you. We are a family. We must help each other. When you were little, you were the most obedient. You will forgive Mum, won't you?" Passers-by kept looking over, their stares full of reproach. They didn't know the whole story, but they have already condemned me in their hearts. Human compassion always unconsciously stands on the moral high ground to criticize the so-called wrongdoer. Although the power of justice is growing, but the forces of evil are also increasing. Then let's seriously compete. I might as well go along with the mistake. Squat on the ground, hug my adoptive mother tightly. Tears can't stop flowing down. I pretended to hug my adoptive mother sadly. Then I went back to the law firm and took a half-day leave. I said I was going to take them home. When I got home, I asked the housekeeping company to clean up the storage room. I arranged for the three of them to move in. My foster mother looked at the small storage room and frowned. She said, "My girl, your sister can't live in such a small room." I took Grace's luggage into the living room and said, "It's spacious here. She can live here." Grace stood in the doorway of my bedroom with her eyebrows knitted and an icy stare. Her anger was undisguised. Before they could say anything, I spoke slowly again. "A teacher I know from the Art Association recently came to Lynn City. This teacher particularly appreciates talented people. My sister's painting skills are so good. I'll take her to meet her someday." My adoptive mother immediately withdrew what she had wanted to say. Grace also affectionately took my hand and said, "Sister, I knew you would be the best for me. This kind of relationship, do you think I can just introduce you to someone and you can easily have a relationship with them? I'm just giving you a little taste of the good life." To make the trick complete, I pretended to go out to order food so that the family could get together. I sneered. I shook hands with her tightly and squeezed out 2 tears from the corner of my eyes. For so many years, I've felt guilty about arguing with my parents. "This time, I must treat you well. Now that I've got the means, you will have a good life," I said, and threw myself into my adoptive mother's arms and pretended to cry. I felt that this was the moment in my life when I was the best actor. I had booked a table at the restaurant downstairs. I had just arrived at the front door. I heard noisy voices coming from the room. "Mom, you see, I was right. She is too kind. Just like grass with no one to love it. You treat him a little better." And she immediately throws herself into it with all her heart. Grace's voice was so loud that it could be heard all the way down the corridor. Our Grace is so clever. All those sad scenes were not in vain. "Mom, you have raised her for so many years. You can't just let her go. You remind her every day to be grateful. Our family will have no worries in the future." I sneered. I didn't say anything. When I got home, my adoptive mother did indeed give me a long-winded lecture on the importance of gratitude. I didn't take her words seriously at all. I just thought she was nagging. I took Grace to meet her friends. I was already doing her a favor. Who knew she wouldn't appreciate it? I was away on business for a week. When I returned, I found that my life was in complete disarray. Grace used my reputation to flaunt herself. She even blatantly took on cases for me that I hadn't accepted. She even vouched for other people, saying that I would listen to her. Lie. "Have you found out what's going on?" I asked my assistant to find out what happened. After hanging up the 18th harassing phone call, I could no longer control my anger. My hands were clenched. I slammed the mouse on the ground in anger. Lai sent the results of the investigation to my email. I opened the file. The pressure made my whole body tremble. Grace had ignored the facts. She wanted me to do things for other people, handle fake cases. What made me even more unacceptable was there were several other cases in there. I had previously made it clear that I would not take any of them no matter how much they paid. She used this tactic to establish relationships with many people, and now she is famous in the art world. This is a really good tactic. I hurried downstairs and drove quickly home. When I returned, I went into the bedroom and saw Grace taking a nap. I grabbed her by the hair and pulled her to the ground with all my strength. Grace opened her eyes sharply from the pain. She tried to resist. She shouted in her mouth, "You crazy. What are you doing? Are you crazy?" But she had never done farm work since she was a child. Her strength was no match for mine. I grabbed her struggling hands with one hand. With the other hand, I hit her slightly plump face. A few hard slaps. "I thought you were like this because your parents were used to it. I didn't expect you to be a troubled child too. You went to college, exploited my reputation, took advantage of me. You took all the benefits." I grabbed Grace by the hair, pulling her out of the house. Some of her seaweed black hair was ripped out. I shook the hair off my hands and kicked her twice more. My foster parents returned from a walk. My foster mother saw Grace lying on the ground. Her legs gave way. She immediately knelt in front of her, holding her tightly in her arms. She anxiously called out, "Grace, Grace, what's wrong?" She looked up. Her face was ashen. Her teeth were clenched. Her eyes were blazing with anger. She suddenly lunged forward and shouted angrily, "I'm not finished with you. How dare you touch my daughter? You outsider." At that moment, the adoptive mother stopped pretending to be close to her daughter. Her body trembled slightly. Her eyes were wide, filled with anger. Lai next to her quickly pulled him back. The property management came over and threw them out. I threw their clothes down the stairs. My foster mother stared at me with fierce eyes. Her eyes were full of danger. My life was never peaceful again. Jack proposed to me on the 5th anniversary of our relationship. "Grace, we've been together for 5 years. You think it's time we had a family? All of our friends have children now. My mother keeps asking when you're going to come to our house. You don't have parents, and we don't care about the dowry. As long as you marry into our family, we'll be family. Every year she gives you a New Year's gift. Just waiting for you to come to our family." Jack took out a diamond ring, kneeled down on one knee, and said to me seriously, "Dear, marry me." The customers eating nearby also joined in the commotion, shouting, "Marry him, marry him." I was holding a knife and fork, cutting a steak, hearing his words. My hand movement paused slightly. In the 2nd year of our relationship, I seriously told Jack about my childhood experiences. The indifference of my biological parents made me lose hope in marriage. I decided not to get married in this life. This decision will not change for anyone. The wounds of my childhood will take a lifetime to heal. I cannot choose my own birth, but I can decide my own future and ending. Marriage is not in my plans. I calmly put down my cutlery. I glance away from him and reply in a light tone, "Jack, I'm a firm non-maritalist." Jack stands there in shock. I stand up and prepare to leave, without a trace of nostalgia. If he can't remember my decision, there's no point in continuing. In my darkest hour, the boy who once brought me brief happiness now seems like he may not be the right one for me. Jack suddenly runs over. Surprised, he grabs me and asks loudly, "Don't you love me the most?" His eyes were red. The whites of his eyes were flushed. Tears were welling up around his eyes. He gripped my hand tightly. It hurt so much that I couldn't help but frown. "Jack, I told you, I won't get married to anyone. No exceptions." I looked straight into his clear eyes. An indescribable sadness welled up in my heart. I felt a little bit sour, but Jack suddenly glared at me with a fierce look in his eyes. "Grace, no wonder you were abandoned. You fell out with your foster parents. You're a heartless person. You're an ungrateful person. Grace said you were a poisonous woman. Now it seems." She was absolutely right. I quickly turned my head and asked in surprise, "How do you know Grace? I've never mentioned Grace to anyone. How does he know?" A trace of unease flashed in Jack's eyes. He turned to run away, but I grabbed him. I stared at his panicked face. I grabbed his chin with my hand. I asked seriously, "Jack, tell me the truth." That night, I was alone on the balcony of my apartment, drinking red wine. The words Jack had said kept echoing in my head. I sighed. This is ridiculous. My eyes fell on the succulent plant Jack had given me on the balcony. I poured the wine in the glass all over the plant. Using the mobile app, I checked the surveillance video from home. The images made my heart ache. During the week I had lived at home, my sister had had an affair with my boyfriend. I should be grateful that she was good at using her wiles to attract people. Or should I be grateful that I had not been seduced by Jack's gentleness? Jack came to see me, but he ended up being attracted to Grace. And my foster mother did nothing at home. She even tacitly approved of Grace's behavior of knowing that the other person had a partner, but still meddling. After the bad-tempered foster parents left my house, they actually told Grace to go find Jack, who was desperate to have a son. They proposed a deal to sell their daughter. As long as you let Grace marry you and help my daughter, we won't ask for a penny. We'll just marry the girl off to you. When I thought about Jack repeating what his foster parents had said, I couldn't help but laugh. It was really ridiculous. That night I had a dream. I dreamed that I had just arrived at my foster parents' house, full of hope. I thought I had escaped the darkness, but I had only fallen into a quagmire where I could see the light. After we broke up, Jack sent me a list of all the expenses he had incurred during our 5 years together. He told me to pay them all back. I only sent him one word in return. I know you committed academic fraud. From then on, the Jack who had always been so noisy in my life disappeared completely. A void was left in my heart, but I unexpectedly felt a sense of relief. Later, I took over an important case. After winning the case, I was awarded a prize of several $1,000,000. My friend and I went to an Audi 4S store to pick up a car. When I got home, I found my foster mother and Grace waiting for me downstairs. My foster mother was supporting Grace, and Grace was supporting herself with her hands. I pretended not to know her and tried to walk past her, but my foster mother suddenly grabbed my hand and anxiously said, "Grace, you must save your sister. Save our family. Your sister is pregnant. She is more than 3 months pregnant. The doctor said that if she aborts now, it will be very harmful to Grace's health. She may not be able to have children again. Your father is in the hospital. I can't handle this alone. The child in your sister's arms is the only heir to the Smith family. When the baby is born, you will be the godmother. In the future, the child will depend on you for care." Tears fell on my hands. I immediately wiped them away with disgust. It was as if I had touched something unclean. My adoptive mother's hair had turned gray. Her face, which had been well maintained, was also lined with wrinkles. It seemed that she had indeed been having a hard time recently. My adoptive mother put down her things. She turned to leave. I grabbed her. I said coldly, "Go." My adoptive mother suddenly turned around and accused me. Then she quickly ran away. Grace knelt on the ground. Because of her slightly bulging belly from pregnancy, fine sweat was dripping from her forehead. When her friend saw this, she suggested that I go inside to deal with it. There were a lot of people on the street, and she was afraid of causing unnecessary discussion. Grace had just walked up the stairs. She crossed her arms, putting on an air of a spoiled brat. She gave me orders. "I recently won an award. Hurry up and find someone to help me. I want to strike while the iron is hot. Open a gallery." I looked down at my phone. I glanced up at her. On the 3rd floor, I pressed pause. I pulled Grace out, kicked the suitcase out of the elevator, and said to her, "Let's go." I did it for old time's sake. "I found you an art cram school that suits you at the entrance to the community. You're pregnant, not disabled. You have arms and legs. Don't come to my place and eat for free. Here's 50 yuan. Consider it the last time I'll be your friend. Take it and go." I pulled a bill from my wallet. I threw it at her. The elevator door slowly closed. Grace's screams gradually faded away. At that moment, in the community property group, the owner on the 3rd floor reported that a woman was causing trouble in the hallway and asked the property management to deal with it quickly. The person who runs the art tuition class at the entrance of the community told me Grace didn't come to class. I raised my eyebrows slightly. This was to be expected. Grace was used to a life of luxury. Why would she be interested in simple white rice and vegetables? Sure enough, she returned to the old painter and continued to be his companion. The adoptive mother did not stay at home to take care of the adoptive father. Instead, she went out alone to look for opportunities for her daughter's artistic career. She hoped that I could help Grace, but I would never agree. Grace's months grew larger and larger. Her belly was already clearly hidden. She used some clever method that made the painter willingly pay to send her abroad to study. My friends from the Art Association and I were having afternoon tea in a cafe when we heard about it. I laughed and shook my head. "This isn't going to study. It's clearly going to give birth, isn't it? Those were the words the adoptive mother said when she saw me. I still remember. Watching this family always get into trouble. I'm afraid they won't let me go easily. Grace's due date has already passed, but this family has not been in touch at all in my life. I went to work at the law firm. As soon as I arrived, I saw a new girl at the reception. She was holding a baby in her arms. She looked at me with a troubled expression. Grace, a middle-aged woman, came in just now. She put the baby down. She said it was your goddaughter. Then she ran away. I couldn't stop her. The girl was crying very sadly. She handed me a letter and said, "That person also left a letter." I held the baby, who was more than 2 months old, and opened the letter. It said, "Girl, your sister is now a painter. Her career is on the rise. She can't afford any negative publicity. The child will be adopted by you. You are now able to raise it." I sneered and shook my head. I reached out and gently pulled the baby's swaddle. She smiled happily, completely unaware that she had been abandoned. I placed the baby in front of the painter's house and rang the doorbell. I handed a letter to the painter's wife. She took the letter and looked at me suspiciously and asked, "Why should I believe you? The divorce proceedings. I can make sure he doesn't get a penny." I calmly replied. The painter's wife clutched the letter in her hand. I stood aside, watching these people fight. The painter's wife and the old painter fought like crazy. The wife angrily ran to where Grace was staying and got into a fight with Grace. The old painter was 50 years old and still had no children. He had always protected Grace. But when he found out that the baby wasn't his, he angrily beat Grace and sent her to the hospital. I looked at Grace in the hospital bed, with gauze on her face. I sighed softly. What a pity she was disfigured. The baby at the bedside was crying. I gently scratched her neck. She looked a lot like Jack. Grace was lying in bed. She gritted her teeth in anger, but she couldn't say a word. "Grace, the evidence has already been submitted in court. You need to explain in detail what happened between you and the painter, and the advantages you received from him. If my client cannot get all of these advantages back, your reputation will be ruined. I will do my job impartially," I said to Grace. Grace struggled to her feet. She pointed at me and kept accusing, "Grace, you've gone too far. The Smith family has supported you for so many years. You are such an ungrateful person." I'm in no hurry. Put away the laptop, stand up and look at her, say, "Grace, I thought you had a conscience. I didn't think you'd lost that too. The show is about to start. But whether you get to see it or not is up to you." While helping the painter's wife collect evidence, I accidentally found something useful. Grace had drawn comics about her secret affair with the old painter. She made money running an account online. She's now a big influencer with millions of followers. After asking her for her opinion, I made her account public. My words were very direct. It attracted the attention of many marketing accounts. The more I investigated, the clearer things became. The old painter's true identity was revealed. His actions with Grace were also exposed. The painter was disqualified from the Gold Award. He lost face in the art world. Grace was also implicated. Her reputation was damaged. I went online to watch videos. I saw the content of various marketing accounts. I couldn't stop laughing. You hurt others, and you will be hurt in return. Grace, your retribution is here. After the video ended, it automatically jumped to the next one. I stared at the content on the screen, feeling a little surprised. Grace's affair with the painter not only caused her to lose face in the circle, but also attracted widespread attention from the outside world. Her adoptive mother did some unscrupulous things in order to make her successful, and it was exposed by the media. People called her adoptive mother a modern version of the evil stepmother in Cinderella. When I saw all this, I just felt helpless and sad. Not long after, I received a phone call from the People's Hospital in my hometown. My adoptive father was so ashamed. He had gone into the hospital in a rage. His condition was not optimistic. I coldly replied, "We are no longer related." I treated them with all my heart, but their maliciousness has exhausted the sincerity of my first half of my life. My adoptive mother lost hope in life due to online violence. She had a nervous breakdown. She finally reaped what she sowed. I went to the police station. I changed my name. There is only one page left in the household register. It only has one name on it, Freedom. This time I want to be as free as a bird.